I was sitting on my porch, thinking back to the bitter marriage I had once endured, when the phone buzzed. My daughter's name, Ashley, lit up the screen. How long had it been since she last called me? A fragile hope flickered inside me. Maybe this was the moment our bond could feel like it once did. Mom, her voice came through, cold, stripped of warmth. We already got married, yesterday. I froze. Married? I tried to keep my tone gentle. But when? Why didn't I? Ashley cut me off, her words sharp as a blade. We only invited people who really matter. Just send the lake house keys, okay? David and I want to spend our honeymoon there. Don't make this dramatic. People who really matter. So I didn't matter? After everything? After raising her with every ounce of sweat I had left following that bitter divorce, suddenly I was no longer important. The call ended. I sat motionless in the garden, the late afternoon sun spilling across my calloused hands. Not a single tear came. My name is Linda, I'm 65 years old, and I live alone in Cape Cod. I raised Ashley after a bitter divorce. That lake house, our lake house, was all we had left. And that's the moment I realized. This wasn't just a slight, it was a beginning. Subscribe if you like this kind of story. On Thanksgiving last year, I remember it so clearly, Ashley had called me earlier that week and said, "Mom, I'm bringing someone special home. I think you're going to love him." I spent the whole morning preparing, roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and her favorite pumpkin pie. My heart was fluttering with that old familiar warmth, like when she was still a little girl running through the kitchen. When the door opened, she stood there with a tall, sharply dressed man by her side. David. He smiled as though he'd been practicing in a mirror, holding out a bouquet of red roses. "Mrs. Carter, what an honor to finally meet you. Ashley has told me so much about you." His voice was smooth, deliberate. Too deliberate. I'd met this kind of man before. My ex-husband had once spoken with the exact same polish. At dinner, David poured on the compliments. He praised Ashley's intelligence, admired my cooking, and even described my home as quintessential New England coziness. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe Ashley had found someone kind. But then, in between stories about his work in finance and his trips abroad, he slipped in a line that made my stomach twist. "I heard you have a lake house up in Sebago, Mrs. Carter. That must be an incredible property. Perfect for Airbnb rentals, I'd imagine. Honestly, if you sold it now while the market's hot, you'd be sitting on quite the fortune." I froze. That was the first time he mentioned the lake house, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. There was something in his eyes as he spoke. Not warmth, not admiration, a glimmer of calculation. I swallowed my wine slowly, forcing myself to stay composed. That house wasn't just wood and bricks. It was all I had left after my husband drained our savings and walked out years ago. It was where Ashley and I had survived summers together, just the two of us. I finally said firmly, "That house isn't for sale. It's our family's memory." Ashley laughed lightly, slipping her hand over his as if to soothe me. "Mom, don't be so sensitive. He's just teasing. I haven't even told him yet about all our summers there." I forced a smile, but inside something tightened. Because I knew that look in David's eyes. I had seen it before, on a man who once promised me forever, then left me broken. I didn't know it yet, but the Thanksgiving dinner was not just a holiday. It was the foreshadowing of a storm that was about to tear through our lives. It was a Wednesday evening. I had just finished grading some papers for my neighbor's grandson when I picked up the phone to call Ashley. I dialed her number the way I used to every evening, our little ritual since she went off to college. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was brisk, clipped. "Hey, Mom, I can't talk long. I've got a deadline." I smiled into the phone even though she couldn't see it. "That's all right, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice. How's work treating you?" A sigh, then, busy. "But David thinks I'm handling it really well. He says I just need to focus on priorities." That phrase again. David thinks. It had slipped into nearly every sentence lately, like an uninvited guest at our conversations. I felt a tiny pinch in my chest, but I pushed it aside. "That's good to hear," I said gently. "Still, you don't want to work yourself into the ground. Maybe you can come by for dinner one night this week? I made that chicken pot pie you used to beg me for." There was a pause on the line. "Mom." David thinks I should be careful about slipping back into old habits. He says it's important that I don't lean on you too much emotionally. You know, boundaries. The word stung. Boundaries. Once upon a time, she would call me at midnight, whispering secrets about her heartbreaks, her big wins at work, even silly gossip from the office. Now, suddenly, those conversations were labeled dependency. I swallowed hard. Ashley, talking to your mother isn't leaning, it's connection. Families are supposed to lean on each other. She gave a small laugh. See, that's exactly what David was saying might happen. You take it personally. I'm not saying I don't love you, Mom. I just need space. Isn't that normal? Normal. The word echoed in my mind, sharp as glass. Since when had we become strangers measuring love in square footage? Since when did my daughter need a man's permission to call me after a hard day? I wanted to tell her I missed her, that the house felt too quiet without her voice filling it. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. Of course, sweetheart. If you need space, I'll give you space. But inside, the silence pressed down like a heavy quilt. When did I lose her? Was it the first time she stopped telling me about her day, or the first time she laughed at something I didn't understand? I sat there after we hung up, staring at the kitchen wall where our family photos hung. In one of them, Ashley was 12, grinning widely, flour on her face from baking cookies with me. That girl had trusted me with everything. Now she trusted someone else, someone whose words she repeated like gospel. For the first time, I wondered if this wasn't just a phase, if I were truly being replaced. It was a Sunday afternoon when Ashley finally stopped by. She stood in my doorway with a polished smile, but her eyes darted like she didn't want to stay too long. I set down the teapot and gestured for her to come inside. Sit, sweetheart. I haven't seen you in weeks. Let me make us some tea. She shook her head, slipping off her coat with quick movements. Just a few minutes, Mom. David and I have plans. That name again. Always at the edge of her sentences. I tried to keep my voice steady. Ashley, I hardly see you anymore. Can't we spend a little time, just the two of us? Like we used to? Her jaw tightened. Mom, this is what I'm talking about. David thinks you're making me feel guilty every time I choose my own life. That's not healthy. The words landed like stones. I stared at her, my own daughter, reciting lines as if she'd memorized them from a book he'd handed her. Inside, my thoughts raced. When did our love become something to diagnose? When did I become a symptom instead of her mother? I folded my hands, choosing each word carefully. Sweetheart, calling your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's human. You don't have to choose between your own life and family. You can have both. She scoffed, crossing her arms. See? You're proving his point. You always want me to share everything with you. You don't see how that holds me back. I felt my throat tighten. Holds her back? Had my love become a chain instead of a shelter? I thought of the nights she cried on my lap after her first heartbreak, when I was the only anchor she had. Was that holding her back? I tried one more time. Ashley, I'm not your prison. I'm your home. Her eyes softened for a flicker of a second, but then she shook her head, stubborn. David says real independence means cutting those emotional ties. I agree with him. And there it was. My daughter, standing in my kitchen, is using a stranger's words to define our bond. I didn't argue anymore. I just nodded, though my chest ached as if something inside me had cracked. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just losing her attention. I was losing her heart, piece by piece, to a man who had decided I was in the way. When I think of Ashley's childhood, I don't remember the crowded apartment we lived in after the divorce. I remember the lake. Those summers by Sebago Lake were everything we had. Just the two of us in that weathered cabin, its paint peeling, its roof leaking when it rained. We didn't have money for vacations, so that cabin became our whole world. I can still see Ashley at 8 years old, standing on the dock in a life jacket 2 sizes too big, her little hands gripping the paddle of our old canoe. Ready, Mom? She shouted, her grin as wide as the lake itself, and I would row us out into the quiet water. We'd watch the sunset turn everything gold, and later we'd lie on the grass, naming constellations while a tiny radio played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She said it made the stars twinkle in rhythm. That cabin was more than wood and nails. It was the one thing my ex-husband hadn't managed to take from me. He'd taken our savings, our security, and nearly my dignity when he walked out with another woman. I remember sitting in court, my hands shaking, as the lawyers dissected 20 years of marriage like it was a failed business deal. He got the car, the accounts, the polished future. I got custody of a child and a cabin that everyone else thought was worthless. But to me, it was priceless. Because in that cabin, I rebuilt myself. I raised Ashley with love fierce enough to patch every hole in the roof, to cook every simple meal over that rattling stove, to make her believe she wasn't missing out on anything the world had. For years, that lake house was our fortress, our sanctuary. Now, when I walk through its rooms, I see ghost images. Ashley curled up on the couch, reading Harry Potter aloud in her dramatic little voice. Ashley, at 16, strumming her guitar on the porch, humming off-key. And I can't help but wonder, when did all that change? When did the girl who once told me, "Mom, I'm going to get married here someday, barefoot in the sand," become the woman who now says, "Just send the keys"? The silence of the cabin feels different now. It used to be full of laughter and music. Now it feels like a question echoing back at me. Was all of it enough? Did I give her enough? Part of me whispers that I failed, that somewhere along the line I lost her to a world shinier than the one I could give. But another voice inside pushes back, steady and fierce. No, love was never a failure. The failure was his, the man who left us, the man who made her believe love could be bought and sold like property. And maybe that's why David unsettles me so much. He carries the same smile, the same polished charm, the same hunger in his eyes. History, it seems, has a way of trying to repeat itself. But this time, I am not the same woman I was 20 years ago. It started small, like hairline cracks in a glass, but once you noticed them, you couldn't unsee them. David never spoke about love when he was around me. Not once. He didn't tell stories about how he and Ashley met or what drew him to her laughter, or how she made him feel alive. Number. His stories were always about numbers, projections, market trends. One evening, while Ashley was in the kitchen checking on the lasagna, David leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Mrs. Carter, that lakefront property of yours has doubled in value in the last decade. If you leveraged it now, you could easily fund 3 other investments. Honestly, people sit on sentimental assets far too long." I smiled politely, but inside my stomach tightened. Sentimental assets. Was that all he thought it was? That house wasn't a stock option. It was the one piece of my life no one had managed to steal. A week later, I stopped by Ashley's apartment with a basket of muffins. She wasn't home yet, so David let me in. While he went to pour coffee, I noticed Ashley's laptop open on the dining table. I only glanced for a second, but it was enough. On the screen was a county records website, and there, in bold letters, was the property deed for my cabin. The splotch of coffee on the desk told me it wasn't Ashley's search. When David returned with the mugs, I quickly looked away. But my heart was pounding. Why is he looking up my deed? Why does he care about ownership? I didn't ask. Not then. Because part of me was afraid of the answer. But the real blow came later. I was sipping tea one morning when my neighbor texted me, "Congrats to Ashley. Beautiful ring." Confused, I opened Facebook, and there it was. A picture of Ashley's left hand, diamond flashing in the sunlight, captioned, "He asked." I said yes. "Can't wait to spend forever with you, David." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, strangers congratulating, but not me, not her mother. I stared at that photo for a long time, my tea growing cold in my hands. Not because she was engaged, but because I'd found out with the rest of the world. When did I become an outsider in my own daughter's life? When did forever stop including me? I wanted to believe David was just thoughtless, not dangerous. That maybe Ashley was just swept up in her romance. But deep down, a heavier thought pressed against my ribs. This wasn't forgetfulness, this was a pattern. And patterns I knew too well. The phone rang just as I was pruning the roses. Ashley's name lit up the screen, and for one foolish second my heart leapt the way it always did. Maybe she wanted to come home. Maybe she missed me. Her voice was flat, mechanical. "Mom, I wanted to let you know. David and I got married yesterday." I froze, clippers still in my hand. "Married? But I thought the wedding was in October." "We decided to keep it small, just immediate family. People who really matter." The phrase sliced through me. People who really matter. My hand trembled, the clippers nearly slipping. I forced air into my lungs, forced calm into my voice. I see. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm sure it was lovely. It was perfect. She rushed on, listing details like she was reciting from a catalog. The vineyard, the flowers, the photos. Not once did she mention me. And then, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and Mom? David and I were hoping you could send us the lake house keys. We thought we'd spend our honeymoon there. It's more private than a resort." So there it was. The real reason for the call. Not to share joy, not to include me, but to ask for the one thing they both believed was already theirs. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, steadying my voice. "The lake house keys," I repeated slowly. "Yes." David's so excited. He's always wanted to see it after hearing all my childhood stories. Excited, of course. Excited to see his prize. I felt something in me go still, like the surface of the lake just before a storm. I smiled, though my lips shook. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure you get them." "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. We'll pick them up Friday." She hung up, her voice trailing into silence. I stood in the garden, clippers hanging at my side, staring at the roses. This wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't even shocking. It was resolved. David thought he could charm his way into my daughter's heart and then into my family's only inheritance. He thought I was just another aging mother who'd quietly step aside, but he underestimated something far more dangerous than his greed. He underestimated a mother backed into a corner. I didn't sleep the night after Ashley's call. At 2 a.m., I sat in my kitchen, staring at the glow of the refrigerator, asking myself the same question over and over. Who exactly is this man my daughter married? By morning, I had made a decision. I dialed an old number, Mr. Cole, a private investigator I'd once met through a neighbor's fraud case. My voice shook as I said, "I need to know everything about a man named David." It took him 6 days. 6 days of digging through records, old marriage licenses, court filings, and bank transfers. And then he placed a thick envelope in my hands. When I opened it, the air in the room seemed to thin. The first pages detailed his aliases, 3 different legal names in the last 10 years. Under one, he'd been sued in 2017 for a fraudulent real estate investment fund. The case was dismissed quietly after a settlement. The next set of documents hit harder. A marriage certificate from 2014. A photo clipped from a local newspaper. David, smiling beside a woman nearly 20 years older, wealthy, her diamond necklace catching the camera's flash. Beneath it, Cole had written, "Marriage lasted 18 months. Divorce followed the discovery of $198,000 missing from her joint account. Funds traced to David. The case was never prosecuted. 18 months. Not long enough for love, but long enough for theft." My hands trembled as I turned the page. There, printed in stark black letters, was something far worse. A search history log. David had looked up my ex-husband's name, our divorce record, and even a 1996 article that mentioned how he had drained our savings before disappearing. David knew. He had studied me, studied my scars, and suddenly it clicked. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was textbook predatory behavior. Psychologists call it exploiting attachment wounds. First, they love bomb, pouring on affection, gifts, and charm to make the victim feel chosen. Then, they slowly isolate the victim from family, suggesting that dependence on others is unhealthy. Finally, they gaslight, rewriting reality until the victim doubts her own instincts. It's the same cycle cult leaders use, the same cycle financial predators like Bernie Madoff used. Disarm with charm, then rob blind. David had picked Ashley because he knew my divorce had left a hole in her. A fear of abandonment, a longing for a man who seemed solid, stable, the opposite of her father. He wasn't the opposite. He was the echo. The last file nearly made me drop the folder. Bank statements, offshore accounts, wire transfers in amounts like $12,500, $47,000, repeated over months, years. Each one a vein in the bloodstream of his deception. Some tied to the wealthy ex-wife, others to business partners I'd never heard of. I shut the folder, my knuckles white. David wasn't just a bad husband. He was a professional predator, a man who turned love into a business model, marriage into a heist. For 27 years, since the day my ex-husband walked out, I had wondered if I was strong enough to raise Ashley alone. That lake house had been the proof of my strength, the one thing no one could take. And now, Here was David circling it like a vulture. But this time, I told myself, history would not repeat. Because this time, I wasn't the broken woman left behind. I was a mother who had seen the monster's face, and I would not let him win. I spent 3 nights at my dining table with nothing but a pot of coffee and the folder Mr. Cole had given me. Page by page, I organized the truth. Not gossip, not suspicion, hard facts, marriage records, bank statements, wire transfers with dates and amounts. $47,000 on May 12th, 2018. $63,000 on October 3rd, 2019. Photographs of David with the wealthy widow he drained. Screenshots of his 3 different aliases, his false consulting companies, and his offshore accounts. By the 3rd night, I felt like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Calm, steady, precise. On the 4th morning, I slipped everything into a leather portfolio I hadn't touched since I was still working as a school teacher. I wrapped it in silver wedding paper and tied it with a white ribbon. And then, I wrote a note in my neatest cursive. Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know his wife's family history. With love, Mom. When Friday came, I drove to Ashley's apartment building. The sky was gray, heavy with the threat of rain. I climbed the stairs, set the box gently at their door, and stood there for one long moment. I imagined Ashley's face when she opened it. Would she be angry? Would she cry? Would she hate me for ruining her illusion? But then I reminded myself, illusions don't last. Truth does. I pressed the doorbell, stepped back, and walked away without knocking twice. As I reached my car, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't helpless. I wasn't waiting to be told what David thinks. I was giving them a wedding gift that would outlast crystal glasses and photo albums. Because some gifts don't sparkle on a shelf, some gifts shatter illusions. Some gifts, once unwrapped, can never be taken back. That afternoon, as I poured myself a cup of tea, my phone rang. Ashley's number flashed on the screen, but when I picked up, it wasn't her voice I heard. It was David, screaming. I spent 3 nights at my kitchen table, the lamplight burning past midnight, sorting through the files Mr. Cole had given me. Each page was heavier than the last, the kind of weight no paper should carry. I chose carefully. Not everything, just enough to tear the mask off David Morrison in one swift pull. First when in the 2017 court documents, a fraudulent investment fund dissolved after $112,000 vanished. David had walked away with a settlement, no criminal charges. Next, the 2014 marriage certificate, and the divorce decree was 18 months later. It cited unexplained withdrawals from the joint account, $198,000 gone without a trace. Then, an email Mr. Cole had pulled from an old laptop David abandoned years ago, dated June 4th, 2020, addressed to a man named Marcus Webb. Her mother lost everything in a divorce. She'll cling to someone stable. That makes her vulnerable. This is our opening. My hands shook as I slid that one in. Proof, not just of theft, but of calculation. He hadn't stumbled into Ashley's life. He had studied us. After that came the bank records. Wire transfers. $47,250 to the Cayman Islands, $63,800 to Belize, over $400,000 hidden offshore between 2019 and 2022. Finally, the photo. Glossy, torn from a newspaper. David arm in arm with his former wife at a charity gala, diamond lights on her neck, his smile broad. The caption is dated February 2015. He disappeared with her money just 3 months later. I slipped them all into a black leather portfolio. Then, because appearances matter, I wrapped it in silver paper, folded the corners neatly, and tied it with a white satin bow. From the outside, it looked like the perfect wedding gift. Inside, it was the gift no one ever asked for. The truth. On Friday morning, I drove into the city, parked 3 blocks away, walked to their apartment with the package clutched against my chest. The hallway was quiet when I set it on the mat outside their door. I added a note, handwritten in steady ink. Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband deserves to know about his wife's family history. With love, Mom. And then I walked away, not once looking back, because I knew the moment that bow came undone, David's honeymoon wouldn't just end. It would shatter. The call came at 2:17 that afternoon. Ashley's name flashed on the screen, but when I answered, it wasn't her voice. It was his. "What the hell is wrong with you?" David roared down the line, his voice cracking with rage. "You crazy old woman, how dare you send us this garbage?" I held the phone away for a moment, the venom almost burning through the speaker. I pictured the package open, the documents scattered across their living room floor, Ashley's eyes widening as she read the truth. "Garbage?" I said softly. "That's strange. Everything in that portfolio came from public records, court filings, bank statements, nothing I wrote myself." "Don't play games with me," he shouted. "You think you can destroy my marriage with your pathetic lies? You're finished, do you hear me? Finished." I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth calm me. "David," I said, steady as stone, "I didn't destroy anything. I simply handed Ashley the truth. If that ruins your marriage, perhaps you should ask yourself why." There was a pause, heavy breathing. Then a muffled sound in the background. Ashley's voice, breaking, her words blurred with tears. "David, stop. Please stop yelling." My heart clenched. That was my daughter, my little girl, caught between a manipulator's fury and a mother's calm. But I kept my voice even. "Ashley," I called gently. David snarled, "She's not talking to you." "Not anymore. You don't get to poison her against me." I closed my eyes. Poison her? Number. He had already poisoned her life, drip by drip, until she didn't even see it. All I'd done was shine a light. "David," I said, my tone colder now, "if the truth threatens you this much, maybe you should be less afraid of me and more afraid of your own past." The line went dead, just like that. But I didn't need to hear more. I had already heard what mattered. Ashley's sobs, faint but real, in the background. For the first time in months, I knew the wall between us had cracked. It was early Sunday morning when the knock came. Not urgent, not loud, just a weak tap, like the person on the other side had no strength left. When I opened the door, my heart clenched. Ashley stood there. Her hair was unwashed and pulled into a messy knot. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and rimmed red as if she hadn't slept in days. She wore the same clothes I'd seen her in the week before, and in her hands, shaking, clutching like a lifeline, was a stack of printed pages. "Mom." Her voice cracked on the single word. I stepped aside silently, letting her in. She moved like a ghost through the doorway, her body small, folded in on itself. At the kitchen table, the same table where she used to do her math homework at 10 years old, where we once laughed over burnt pancakes, she dropped the papers onto the wood with a thud. They slid across the surface, spreading like fallen leaves. Emails, bank statements, screenshots, contracts, his name, David, stamped again and again, in black ink that seemed to scream. Ashley pressed her hands against the table, knuckles white. "I went through his laptop," she whispered. "I had to see for myself." My throat tightened. I wanted to reach for her, but I waited. This was her moment, her choice to face what she had run from. She shook her head slowly, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "I thought you were just overprotective. But Mom," her voice broke completely, "he's not who he says he is." The room felt unbearably still. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, a cruel reminder of time wasted, of years spent building a love that wasn't real. Inside, my thoughts churned. This is it. The crack in the wall. The moment my daughter sees with her own eyes what I had feared all along. But on the outside, I stayed still, steady, the way I had been the night she was 5 years old and woke screaming from nightmares. For 2 days, she'd been missing, unreachable, and now, here she was, shattered, fragile, but here. And in that simple fact, despite all the wreckage between us, my heart whispered the truth. She came back. She still came back to me. Ashley sat at the table, staring at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into a different truth. Her hands shook as she picked up one page, an email header with David's name bold across the top. "Mom," she whispered, he even wrote about you." About the divorce. Her eyes flicked up to mine, filled with pain. "He said because you lost everything, I would always crave someone who looked stable. He used your past to get to me." Her voice cracked. He knew exactly where my scars were, and he pressed on them until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I felt my chest ache, not just for her, but for the child she once was. 10 years old, clutching my hand in that courtroom while her father signed away our family. Ashley slammed the papers down suddenly, her voice rising. God, I was so stupid. I thought he loved me. I thought I was building a future, and all the while he was just studying me like a project. Tears spilled over her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands. I chose him over you. I believed him when he said you were the problem. And now? Her shoulders shook. Now I see. You were the only one who ever told me the truth. I leaned forward, my hand covering hers. Ashley, look at me. Slowly, she lifted her tear-streaked face. You're not stupid, I said firmly. You were manipulated. There's a difference. Men like David, predators, they don't target weak women. They target strong ones, women with something worth stealing. You were never weak, Ashley. He just twisted your strength until it looked like a flaw. She let out a broken sob. But I hurt you. I shut you out. I said horrible things. I left you out of my wedding. Shh. I pulled her into my arms, cradling her the way I had when she was small. She clung to me, shaking. It doesn't matter. I whispered into her hair. None of that matters now. You came back, and as long as you come back, it's never too late. It's always enough. For a long time, we stayed like that, mother and daughter holding onto each other in the silence of a kitchen that had witnessed every chapter of our lives. And in that silence, I knew she wasn't lost anymore. After that night in my kitchen, Ashley didn't waste time. The next morning, she walked into the precinct with a folder clutched tight to her chest, the same folder I'd once wrapped as a wedding gift. She placed it on the table in front of Detective Karen. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. These are his emails, his bank transfers, proof he married me only to access my inheritance. Karen flipped through page after page, her eyes narrowing. This is strong, she said finally, but with men like him, paperwork isn't enough. We need him caught in the act. Are you willing to help us? Ashley hesitated, her fingers knotting together in her lap. Then she nodded. For the first time in weeks, there was fire in her eyes instead of tears. What David was planning wasn't a simple sale con. Men rarely sell property outright. They know they don't own it. Instead, they use what law enforcement calls a fraudulent conveyance or advance fee scam. They promise rights to something they can't legally transfer, then take the money up front. In David's emails, he bragged about having a way to move the lake house once he and Ashley consolidated assets. It was the same trick he had pulled before, collecting a down payment, then vanishing before the victim realized the papers were worthless. Over the next days, Ashley dug deeper into his laptop. She uncovered a thread with a man posing as an investor. In the messages, David promised he could transfer ownership of the lake house through a special arrangement, even though the deed was in my name. That's our opening, Karen said, sliding the folder back across the table. We'll have him meet this investor in person. Only it won't be an investor. It'll be one of ours. Friday, 7 p.m., an upscale cafe downtown. I sat at home with my phone in hand, the clock ticking like a hammer inside my chest. At 7:06, Ashley's text came through. He's here. The meeting's starting. I closed my eyes, picturing him, slick in his tailored suit, rehearsed smile plastered on his face, sliding contracts across a polished wooden table. Ashley told me later how it unfolded. David leaned in, lowering his voice. The property's in the family. Once Ashley and I consolidate assets, it's as good as ours. All I need is a show of good faith. Wire me a down payment, say $250,000, and I'll handle the paperwork. The undercover agent stirred his coffee, letting the silence stretch. Then he asked the question that mattered. So, you're admitting the house isn't legally yours, but you can still sell it? David gave a little smirk, the kind that once charmed my daughter. He tapped the table with his pen, cocky as ever. Trust me, it's handled. That was the moment. The cafe doors banged open. 2 federal agents swept in, badges flashing under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Chairs scraped back, cups rattled on saucers. David barely had time to stand before his wrists were slammed down and cuffed to cold steel. What the hell is this? He roared, eyes wild, veins bulging at his temple. From the corner, Ashley rose to her feet. She had been waiting with Karen, hidden behind a tall plant near the wall. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady when she faced him. This, she said, her eyes cold, is the end. The cafe went silent, save for the metallic click of the handcuffs. Diners watched wide-eyed as David was dragged out into the night, shouting curses that echoed uselessly in the street. When Ashley came home that night, she collapsed into my arms. Her body was trembling, but there was a lightness in her face I hadn't seen in years. "He was going to sell it, Mom," she whispered hoarsely. "Your house, our summers. He thought he could just erase all of it for money." I held her tighter, my hand stroking her hair like when she was a child. "No one can erase that, Ashley. Not him. Not anyone." And then I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "He underestimated us. He underestimated you." The weeks that followed were heavy, but they carried a different weight, one of rebuilding, not of fear. Ashley met with an attorney at the courthouse, hands steady this time. She signed the petition to annul her marriage on the grounds of fraud. Under U.S. law, when a marriage is entered under deception, financial or otherwise, it can be declared void, as if it never existed. She also filed a civil complaint against David. "Fraudulent inducement," the lawyer explained, pointing at the statute. "He lured you into marriage to gain financial access. That's actionable in civil court. And the fact that he attempted to profit from a house that wasn't his, strong evidence of intent." Ashley didn't flinch. "File it. Every count." But her role didn't end there. The FBI had traced David's trail back nearly a decade. 2 other women came forward, victims who had once been silenced by shame. And now Ashley sat beside them, not as competition, not as another casualty, but as an ally. In the courtroom, she took the stand. Her voice was clear, carrying across the hushed chamber. "He didn't just lie to me. He studied me. He used my mother's pain, her divorce, her struggles, to make me believe I needed him. And then he tried to erase the very place that held our happiest memories. He's not just a liar. He's a predator." A pause. You could hear the scratch of the court reporter's pen, the creak of wooden benches as jurors leaned forward. Ashley's hands trembled slightly on the railing, but she did not look away from David. "I'm here because I won't let him do it to anyone else." In fraud cases like David's, courts can order restitution, forcing the perpetrator to repay what was stolen. Civil suits allow victims to recover damages for emotional distress as well as financial loss. When multiple victims band together, it can become a class action. Amplifying their strength, Ashley agreed to join that effort. Outside the courthouse, the 3 women stood together, the late autumn wind tugging at their coats. For the first time in months, Ashley's shoulders looked lighter. That night, as she sat at our old kitchen table, she reached across and held my hand. "Mom," she said quietly, "I know I hurt you. I know I pushed you away. But if you'll let me, I want to rebuild what we lost." I squeezed her hand, tears stinging my eyes. "Ashley, love isn't something that disappears. It bends, it bruises, but it doesn't vanish. And it's never too late to come home." For the first time in a long while, we ate together without tension, just mother and daughter, safe in the home no one could ever take from us. After the hearings, after the lawyers and the reporters and the long days in court, Ashley and I packed a few bags and drove north. "To rest," she said, "just for a while." So we came back here, to the lake house. The moment we opened the door, the smell of cedar and old pine rushed in. The same creak in the floorboards greeted us, the same hum of crickets outside the porch. Ashley paused in the doorway, her hand brushing the frame, her eyes wet. "It feels smaller," she whispered, "but somehow safer." Over the next days, she wandered through her old memories, canoe paddles leaning against the shed, the fire pit we built one summer night when the power went out, the porch swing where she once played guitar off-key. Slowly, the girl she used to be seemed to return in fragments, stitching herself back together. At night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn air. The lake stretched quietly and endlessly before us, the stars sharp in the clear sky. "Mom," Ashley said softly, her head resting on my shoulder, "I want to tell you something." "Go on." "Do you remember when I was 12 and I said I wanted to get married here? Barefoot in the sand with fairy lights strung through the trees?" I smiled at the memory, my chest tightening with both ache and joy. "You said the lake was your cathedral." She laughed, then her voice turned serious. "One day, I still want that. A real wedding. Not built on lies, not stolen promises. And when that day comes, you'll walk me down the path. Because anyone who doesn't honor you doesn't deserve me." My eyes blurred, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The only sound was the water lapping against the shore, the same rhythm we'd listened to all her childhood summers. "Then it will be perfect," I whispered. "The way it was always meant to be." By then, David Morrison's story was no longer a secret. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted property theft. The judge's gavel came down hard. 12 years in federal prison plus restitution of $1.3 million to his victims. For a man who had lived on charm and stolen wealth, it was the one thing he could never smile his way out of. That night, as Ashley squeezed my hand on the porch, I realized the lake house wasn't just a refuge. It was proof. Proof that even when love had been twisted, when trust had been broken, it could be rebuilt. The stars glittered above us, steady and bright. The house stood firm, as it always had. And for the first time in years, so did we. Maybe that's the real lesson of all this. Predators like David don't just chase money. They chase trust. They chase loneliness. They look for wounds and call them opportunities. But no matter how clever the scheme, truth always has a way of finding daylight. And family. Family is the anchor they can never steal. Ashley thought she had lost everything, but she hadn't. She still had a place to come home to and a mother who never stopped waiting. That's what saved her in the end. Not the law, not the verdict, but the simple fact that love, real love, doesn't vanish. It waits. So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. Don't let anyone convince you that love is weakness. And don't ever doubt that it's worth fighting for the people who matter. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give, the one that truly lasts, is not money, not houses, not even justice. It's the gift of truth. So, that's how the story ends. If this made you think, or if you've lived through something similar, share your thoughts in the comments. Our channel is a space for sharing tales of the elderly and family revenge stories from people who have weathered life's storms. Subscribe to the channel for more, because sometimes the deepest form of revenge is simply living on your own terms.